we're going to cover a few topics here. Let me just start um, first looking at preparedness. So preparedness are the actions that are taken before a disaster to minimize the impacts. And these are usually the short-term actions, because the mitigation is the more long-term actions. For when we talk about preparedness, it's very important to think of risk communication and public awareness, because preparedness is about not only preparing the government, the local government agencies, and sometimes even the national government agencies for the disaster, the impending disaster, but also to prepare the public. So the public should know very clearly what are the risks in that area, what are what are the vulnerabilities, how it can impact them. Is it prone to cyclones? Is it prone to earthquakes, and so on? For that risk communication part, the local government must have a good, robust diagnosis of the possible shocks and stresses. So they should know not only what kind of hazards can impact that area, but they should also know who are the most vulnerable, where are they, how will different types of disasters impact them. So an earthquake impact will be different from a cyclone impact, would be different from a flood impact, and a COVID impact is totally different. They also need to understand the interconnectedness of disasters. So often we have cascading emergencies. So for example, in East Japan, earthquake led to a tsunami, led to a nuclear disaster. And even today, we have so many places where there is COVID, but there's also forest fire, or there is urban floods, and things like that. So we need to look at that. And also to ensure that the emergency functions are integrated well into the planning. And in some local governments, it has also happened that the emergency services are linked with the planning, land use planning department, because these are quite interlinked. Especially the use of land for storing supplies, for shelters, for evacuation areas, and the evacuation routes. So we have an example. It's also there in the guidelines, which is the Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and they developed the municipal emergency plan, or PEM as they call it, and then the case talks about what were the different aspects they looked at. So including the multi-sectoral analysis, all the what is the geography and the conditions in that area, doing the risk assessment, so looking at the possible damages, but also looking at vulnerability, and then having the structure, the operationalization, so how early warning would work, and how will it be declared normal, and what kind of implementation can be done for the emergency plan. So of course, for emergency plans, it's also important to do the drills, not only within the government, but also with the local communities, because they must know what to do. For example, in the East Japan earthquake, there was so much dependence on the hardware that many people did not respond to the early warning, because they thought that the hardware will protect them. So that caused higher levels of casualties. Then we look at the next part is the response. And response is when the disaster is upon us. And then it involves all the what we call the search and rescue, the civil defense work, the emergency rescue operations, the mass evacuations if required, the emergency shelters where people go. So for earthquake, it would be different. It is open spaces, parks. So again, detailed planning and emergency preparedness and response are linked, because in the city, there should be, in the local government, there should be enough open spaces so that people can evacuate in case of an earthquake. But then in case of cyclones, it's often underground, maybe the subway system or others, basements and all are used to shelter, or moving to high ground. So it's different for different situations. And also what is the system of emergency medical care? So are the doctors and nurses trained in triage? Are they trained in mass casualty management, and so on? And all of this requires a very close coordination between the national government and the local government, because often national governments are also have a role to play both in the early warning, but also in the response and in the immediate, in fact, also in the immediate recovery humanitarian work. And also it requires coordination within the different departments of the local government, because everyone has a role to play. It is not just the responsibility of one. Then in the guidelines, we have these three cases. First one of Christchurch, where they tried to use a participatory process to involve with the communities in the developing their response plans and strategies. This is very important, because if the community is involved, they know, firstly, they are empowered, and secondly, they have a higher level of ownership and commitment to that plan. So it's very important to have the community engaged. Also, of course, it makes sense because the community knows better their situation than anyone outside. In Albay, they had this, in the Philippines, they had this a strategy for zero casualties, and it has been very effective actually. For the 20 years after the strategy was established, there was not a single casualty due to a disaster. So their strategy, of course, focused on volcanic eruptions and typhoons. Typhoons are same like cyclones or hurricanes in different other parts of the world. And they created a structure, a governance structure. So they called it Disaster Management Office, so that it can coordinate the early warning and evacuation and so on. This also entails some level of legal activity, because you need to have the orders, the protocols, the regulations in place, which can empower the disaster management agency or office or department to issue orders of closure, orders of evacuation, and so on. So they need some legal backing. And then the third example is from Germany, where they, in Bochum, they also did the awareness raising, and then developed the specific structures, again, the institutional and governance structures, so that the response can be well coordinated.